Let me read to you a passage from the 11th chapter of St. Matthew's Gospel, verses 16 to 19. It's the Gospel for Friday of the second week of Advent, Year A. And in it our Lord speaks of the patience of God. St. Matthew writes, Jesus said to the crowds, "To what shall I compare this generation? It is like children who sit in marketplaces and call to one another, 'We played the flute for you, but you did not dance. We sang a dirge, but you did not mourn. For John came, neither eating nor drinking, and they said, He is possessed by a demon. The Son of Man came, eating and drinking, and they said, Look, he is a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. But wisdom is vindicated by her works." That's from Matthew chapter 11, verses 16 to 19. What does it suggest to us? Well, it could be claimed that a constant prompt for religion in the heart of man and society is the need and the cry for salvation. It could be salvation from hunger, or any one of a number of threats man faces in a threatening world. He appeals to the powers above for salvation. And what is especially distinctive about Christianity is that the appeal is one that God Himself has educated man to make. That appeal is for salvation primarily from sin. Not only is sin totally disastrous for man, in a way that any other threat is not, but sin is especially offensive to God. If man wants to be saved, and if he wants to be regarded well by the one on whom he totally depends, then he must take action against sin. But effective action against sin is impossible for him because of himself he is simply under its power. Man is fallen. He needs the saving action of God. He needs divine grace. And that grace has been won for us and bestowed on us by the Son of God made man, Jesus Christ. So it is that the Christian religion involves not only man's appeal for salvation, but God's initiative in both educating man as to what true salvation is and responding to this appeal with a superabundant life, a life in abundance, a share in the divine life itself. But there is one feature of this that ought to be remembered. All this involved a history. God entered history, and over a long period of time did His work for us and our salvation. It was a historical process. We speak of salvation history. Our salvation, as I said, entailed a salvation history starting remotely in the past, taking definite shape and with more decisive divine intentions, leading to the greatest step imaginable, the incarnation, the life, the death, and the resurrection of Christ our Redeemer. Now, there has been a notable characteristic of this history of salvation. It has been divine patience. And this divine patience with man has been inventive. God has not given up on His people despite their inveterate sinning. He has not given up. He has been patient, and He has tried one thing after another. Something of this is referred to by our Lord in our Gospel passage today that I read earlier. He refers on the one hand to his own generation, and on the other hand to the wisdom of God in its saving action. He says, "To what shall I compare this generation? It is like children who sit in the marketplaces and call to one another, 'We played the flute for you, but you did not dance. We sang a dirge, but you did not mourn. For John came, neither eating nor drinking, and they said, He is possessed by a demon. The Son of Man came, eating and drinking, and they said, Look, he is a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners.' But wisdom is vindicated by her works." Matthew, that's in Matthew of course, chapter 11, 16 to 17, 16 to 19. That is to say, God tries one thing and he tries another. He sends the prophets, and John in particular, and that does not gain the response he is seeking. He sends his own Son with a very different manner and method, and that likewise gains little response. We are reminded of the cry in the book of the prophet Isaiah, "What more could I have done for you that I have not done?" God has tried everything, and our Lord himself in his public ministry tries everything as it were, but to little avail. However, there is hope in his words in our passage today. Wisdom is vindicated in her works. That is to say, in her children, in her offspring, in her issue. God will most certainly succeed in his saving work. The preaching, the cross, and the resurrection and establishment of his church on earth will most certainly gain the victory. And so our Lord's lament and hope passes on to the church and the church's children. The church, generation after generation, continues to send out to the world her ministry and her missionaries, despite generation after generation of seemingly dim prospects. The world always wants something different, and is never satisfied by the church, nor indeed by Christ himself. But Christian optimism never flags, just as a holy optimism never flagged in the heart of Christ himself. The wisdom of God is justified by her issue. The fruits of God's work, of his patience and his unwearied inventiveness, will be justified in the event. Salvation has come through the death and resurrection of Christ, and is manifest in the abundance of saints in the history of the church. It will attain its full flowering in the age to come. All this will be despite the response of so many. Let us then pray for the grace to respond to the smallest invitations which God extends to us, and let us bring this same grace to all those immersed in the chores of everyday life.